first one is from Anon. His question that he'd like to get an answer for is, how do we adequately define cEDH as a format in a way that doesn't directly or indirectly lead to the pitfalls of groupthink and gatekeeping? Some of the examples he gives is that, like, some of the treatment of newer players that they're asking questions on this subreddit, like sometimes a common reply is, just check the database. Your commander isn't on there, so it's probably can't be competitive, or some other types of, like, some of the larger play discourse have certain type of curations that not everybody's into, things like that. So, I will start. So I guess for me, this question's kind of broken up into like 2 or 3 parts. The first part is how do we adequately define cEDH in a manner that doesn't fall into groupthink and doesn't fall into gatekeeping? So that at best is a complicated question. The main issue I see with it is that everybody has varying opinions on it, and there is no concise, definitive answer as this is and this isn't. Very much like how, like, the power level discussion overall is not concise and definitive. A lot of it is, I have a certain concept in my head of what a certain thing is, and then I'm comparing what I have to that. So, Jim from the Spike Fitters actually did a really good Spike on the Mic episode about this. And one of the things he discussed was, like, I might have, like, a Kami of the Crescent Moon list, which is actually kind of one of my favorite non-cEDH commanders. For those of you who don't know, he's a Howling Mine. So everybody else gets a card before I do. And he's a 1/3. And I tend to build most of my decks pretty high power to begin with. But it's really not cEDH. And I only consider that deck like a 6 or a 7, but it's running Mox Diamond, it's running Force of Will, it's running Mana Crypt, it's running all the things that a mono blue deck would run, and then its win con is Mind Over Matter. But the deck is still like $3,000-$4,000, but it's a casual deck. Whereas other people might view that as an 8, whereas I only view it as a 6. So if somebody thinks their deck is a 4 because it's obviously less powerful than that Kami of the Crescent Moon deck, they might slot theirs down to a 4 based on that knowledge. Or if they think that, maybe it's a 5. So a lot of times it's like, I forget the exact term to use, but it's kind of like you're comparing, everything's getting compared to something relative, but what everybody considers is also subjective as well. Like, certain metas would consider my Kami of the Crescent Moon a 2, even though it is $4.5 grand or $4 grand or whatever. You kind of get what I'm saying? So there, in and of itself, like our common verbiage, our common vernacular that we use essentially from the ground up, even from the start of the format, to describe power levels is flawed, obviously. But it's the best verbiage we have. So until we can kind of come up with a universal, like, deck assessing system for the whole spectrum of Commander, I don't think that there's going to be a good, concise, like, very clear way of defining what is and what isn't, because while the top of the format is pretty clearly defined, it's when you start getting down into the fringe decks, the meta buster decks, the parasitic decks, the predatory decks, or just even the decks that are just a little bit lower than that, it really starts to get gray and it really starts to get murky. Especially when you take into account that a lot of times, especially in localized metas, mostly like offline, like, you don't necessarily see the top of the top as much because people get bored playing that stuff. Like, to be honest, you might see more fringe decks, more spicy decks. You might have that one friend who just likes playing his, I don't know, Gliss of the Trader deck all the time. And that's fine. But again, like, that doesn't lend itself to a very, like, objective classification system. What Jim suggested was to kind of model it more similar to how, like, at least this is how I interpret it, the Johnny, Timmy, Spike kind of system, where it's like you kind of make like a commander mission statement, and then you kind of collect enough mission statements, and then you can kind of start aggregating groups. And since that aggregation, like, since those kind of definitive answers aren't, well, like a grading system of 0 to 10 or battle cruiser to max power, like, it could potentially lend itself to being a little more authentically assessed than, people trying to, because people don't want to say that their decks are inferior to other decks. And to be honest, like, I get that. I do. So that maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure of where a good metric would be. Like, for me, I generally kind of tend to gauge, like, budget-wise where I'm at, as far as, like, when I'm trying to just kind of, like, if I go to a Command Fest or an LGS or something, I try to kind of scout out, like, are they playing a bunch of tapped lands? Are they, and just kind of try to fit in like that. I'm not saying it's an easy answer, but so that's for the first part. You guys got any thoughts on the first part?
I think the definitive answer is that there is no definitive answer.
True.
What tends to be a big issue with our community is people take things as gospel way too quickly. We saw it with the cEDH tier list that came out, years ago. Everybody, before the database, that was the thing that people were like, check the tier list. Your commander isn't tier 0 or tier 1, so they're garbage. And then the same thing started happening once the database came on board, is people started taking the database as gospel. And what people fail to realize is it's not gospel, it's guidelines. Here is where, historically, and from what people's play experiences have seen, is something for you to gauge on, but it is not the end all be all. And I think people take that to heart too quickly and too easily, because they want an answer. They want to be able to say, yeah, check the database, because otherwise they have to get a little philosophical with it. And there's just so many nuances, and it's very easy to get those nuances wrong. And I think it goes back to nobody wants to be wrong.
Mm-hmm. Right. Definitely. I actually think the first and second part of this question are innately linked to each other, which I'll get to in a minute. But I also think the first part of this question is also flawed in its phrasing. cEDH is not a separate format. It shouldn't be defined as a separate format.
It's not.
It is still EDH. It is still Commander. It is Commander taken, turned up to 11, but it's Commander. And we know this because the difference between what is high power and max power Commander, that line is very blurry and depends a lot on what you're doing and who you're playing with and all this other stuff. And I think I agree with Cricket here that there is no really definitive answer. I mean, at one point I wrote a whole thing about potential power levels, and there were 5 metrics that I looked at. I call it the SCARS model. So speed, consistency, God, I can't remember the third one. What's the A? Resilience was the R, and synergy was the second S.
Amplitude? Acceleration?
Might be acceleration. Might be... I'll look it up. I'll remember in a minute. Okay. But the basic idea behind what I was coming up with was, like, there's 5 different metrics in which we consider how a deck works as a deck. But we also have to consider the pilot behind the deck, because the way that you pilot your deck and the way you go into a game can take a deck, like, say you're playing Selvala Bro Storm off the database, the same deck. You can play that as well as you can possibly play it, and it's a very, very powerful deck. Right. And you can play that and just kind of be screwing around with your friends and not really paying a lot of attention, and it's still a very powerful deck, right? It's got a high floor.
Yeah.
But if you're not playing it super well and you're maybe enjoying some beverages and getting a little loose, then maybe that floor is where you're at. And that floor might not be where we would say this deck is cEDH, because your intent matters. Right. Which gets into the second part of this. Because max power EDH, because cEDH is very much a part of the larger Commander landscape and the larger Commander community. Mm-hmm. The idea of gatekeeping is a very tricky one, because I agree with the person who asked this question. I think Anon is probably anonymous, so we don't know who it is, but
right.
I agree that there are aspects of the community that do come across as gatekeeping. I'm a moderator on the subreddit, and there are a lot of comments that don't break any rules on the subreddit, but also aren't super helpful, right? Like that, go check the database, go do whatever. And like Cricket said, people are looking for answers, and the problem is most of our resources are put together by people who are pretty smart, and they develop them to ask more questions, not necessarily to give answers. The database is a resource that provides some information, but it provides just as many questions about what cEDH looks like as it provides answers. Yeah. When I do the cEDH metagame project, that is designed to ask questions rather than necessarily provide answers. Yeah. So, the basic idea there is that when people are looking for these ideas and looking for something solid and consistent and what they, they're looking for somebody to tell them the answer. And that doesn't work in EDH, and it doesn't work in cEDH because cEDH is EDH. Yeah. You have to be able to have conversations. You have to be able to build up what you're looking for, which is why when it comes to things like, the question didn't name groups, but let's name them, right? When we're talking about Play EDH with deck checks, or the cEDH Nexus with the apprenticeship program, or any of the public-private discords where it's a public game-finding discord, but it's not actually really that public because you have to get invited to it. And there's a few of those. Probably more than I know about because I'm only in like one or two of them. But the idea behind those is that people are looking for a specific experience when they're playing cEDH. And that might look different from place to place. Right? Max power on Play EDH is a different meta than cEDH Nexus, which is a different meta than cEDH Games, which is different than the subreddit Discord, which is different than these private Discords. And that's fine. Right, that's the thing. We have to recognize these are playgroups of people who want to play with each other and have created the environment they wish to play in. To someone who is outside that may seem like gatekeeping. And it's a very fine line whether it is or isn't. And I fall on the side of the line that says, yes, this is a restriction, but it is designed to curate the play experience that more people want. And people can disagree with that. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, so that was kind of why I kind of broke it up into two. So, like, the first part of that question was for the person seeking information. Mm-hmm. Like, that person should be helped with open hands.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. The second question is, when it comes to these playgroups, and to be frank, Play EDH is a playgroup. The Nexus is a playgroup. The subreddit Discord is a playgroup. cEDH Games is a playgroup. The Founders Club is a playgroup. All the different content creators, those are all playgroups. Mm-hmm. And
they're basically big LGSs, right? Imagine going into...
they're somebody's house that you get invited over to. Like, sure, you might have gotten a flyer and you can go in publicly, but at the end of the day, like, it is a group of people who have invested in a community that they want, and in that community, they have a certain standard they want upheld. And it is, frankly, it's their privilege and their right to have those standards upheld. Now, with that in mind, it is a good idea to have as many diverse playgroups as possible so that there's different feels for different people, instead of it only being one place with one feel, take it or leave it. And, you know, so I guess kind of the TLDR of that is that those types of environments, as the outsider, like you said, might kind of come across as gatekeeping to you as the outsider, but at the same time, it's also the standard that group wants to uphold, and it's they're in a position to be able to do that, but also at the same time, like, there needs to be multiple places with different environments and different feels so that there's more options.
Right.
You know, in biology, we have a saying that I love. It's called solution to pollution is dilution. So if all you have is a small concentration of things and they are a certain way, then you have a very narrow group of options. Whereas the broader your options are, the more diverse you'll get. That's one of the reasons why I like that bot so much that we talked about, is because it will allow people to have a different option. Like, I can think of 5 Discords that are public that all have different feels to them. There's Commander's Vault, there's the virtual LGS, there's Playgroups, there's the Nexus, there's the subreddit, cEDH Games. Actually, that's 6. That's not even counting all the content creators. They all have LFGs. Some of them are Patreon access only. A lot of them aren't. And having those environments and making sure those environments are promoted and talked about and known about is probably, for me, the most essential part to it, I guess.
Because, you know, oftentimes if you live in a town, you might have one LGS accessible to you. And if you don't dig the vibe there, take it or leave it. But online, we have all these different options. And the other thing about it is, you know, the time that, so full disclosure, I do admin work on the Nexus, but realistically, I'm the quietest admin because I don't do a whole lot. But
you do paperwork. You do
yes, basically. But the basic idea, you know, is that on all these Discords, you know, whether it's Nexus or PlayEDH or the subreddit, the people there aren't looking to exclude people. Nowhere are they looking to say, no, we don't want you here. We, you know, go away. They're looking to promote a specific environment in a way that they deem positive. And as an outsider, we may or may not agree with what that looks like. That's so that we have a lot of options. And what goes along with that is that on all of these subreddits, you will run into helpful people. Most people on these subreddits are helpful. Some of them maybe come off a little terse or a little standoffish, but we also have seen, you know, for a long time, when somebody comes into a place and disagrees with the way it's run, they're not looking for a conversation about why it is the way it is. They're looking for validation of their opinion. And these playgroups, as Timmy said, they're under no force to no requirement to give you validation of your opinion. They are set up in specific ways for specific reasons, and that's why there are so many different ones, because people who are in one playgroup have disagreed with the way another playgroup is run. Yeah. That's totally fine.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, most of the time, a lot of those open LFGs anyway just wind up simply being a clearinghouse for private playgroups to be formed. I mean, I don't know how many content creator groups, large and small, started from people playing together and vibing, and then they start their own thing. You know, and yeah.
I mean, look at some of these conglomerations of content creators that are out there. Mind sculptors are people from various different parts of the country and various different discords that they've all been on, but they all got to know each other, like each other, make good content. Same with Lab Maniacs when they were together, or the new iteration of Team Turn 3. Like the old one used to be a bunch of guys in Montreal, like Pongo and his buddies, and now it's Pongo and Scoots and Spleenface and a couple other people, from all over the place. And these are people who got to know each other in these groups and said, we like the way we do things together. Let's keep working with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a both and. It's like, I mean, there's places I don't like the vibe, and I just don't. I prefer personally to promote the places that I like to engage in instead of focusing my energy on being angry at the places I don't vibe with and don't enjoy. Like, there's places I'm at that you don't hear me talking about, and it's mostly because I'm just not like a super into the vibe there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people don't look at both sides of that, right? They're the people who curate those servers who are like, well, why doesn't everybody like us? What are we doing wrong? And it's like, well, it's not going to be for everybody. And then on the same side of the coin, the people who are like, oh, I hate this place, like, screw those guys. It's like, well, you don't have to like them. Nobody's forcing you to stay here. You can move on. You can join another one. You can create your own. Like, nobody's holding a gun to your head.
Yeah. I've got tons of play. If anybody has a hard time finding a place to play, I can give you a list of Discords that you can check out, and they will all have distinctly different feels.
And the other thing is, most of these places take feedback if it is presented in good faith, right? The thing is, if you're going to come in and yell and, to use an analogy, if you're going to come into my house and take a dump on the rug, I'm not going to let you stay in my house. But if you're going to come into my house and, stay a little while and be a polite guest and tell me something, maybe you don't like my cooking in some way, and talk to me about it constructively,
right?
We can talk about that.
Can you clean your toilet once in a while? It smells like a gym locker in here,
Yeah.
But you got to get to know somebody first for you to tell them the rug's dirty.
Just to circle back to the idea of gatekeeping, in other ways, I do think we as a community have a bit of an issue with this. And I think there are kind of two reasons why. Mm-hmm. I think they're solvable, but the problem is they're not solvable top down. They have to be bottom up.
Yeah.
The first problem is that we have a high degree of prior knowledge that it takes to get invested in it. People, when they're brand new to the format, people will say, oh, just go check the database. They might not know what the database even is, right? And that's a whole other step. Like, that's the bottom tier. And maybe people are coming in the middle. But answers like that, there should be more
nuance to it.
Exactly, and more of a discussion. Even if you reference the database as a resource,
right,
that helps. The second issue is, because of the way that EDH and cEDH have interacted in the past, and when I say in the past here, it hasn't really totally gone away. There's a big kerfluffle on Twitter last weekend about the way that some EDH content creator was talking about cEDH content, and who cares, right? People like to blow that stuff up, and when that happens, we start to see a circling of the wagons. All the cEDH people start to pull together and say, this is an outrage, this is a travesty, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
we can be upset about it. I'm not saying don't be upset, right?
Right.
If somebody's being a jerk and says something that's, a jerkish thing to say, it's okay to call them out. And it's okay to say, that's not cool.
Right.
But at the same time, when we circle the wagons, we become that insular group. And that's when the walls go up and when the gates really truly get kept.
Yeah.
And the issue is, if we look at cEDH as a whole, like I said, it's part of EDH. It's not its own separate thing. And if we try to make it its own separate thing, that only hurts us. It doesn't hurt most EDH players. It really doesn't.
No.
The warmth and invitation in, that's what we need.
I'll disagree with you on that point.
That's fair.
If people treat cEDH like a separate insular format from Commander, what that does is that pushes people who have kind of crept towards it back down into the lower power levels.
That's a fair point. cEDH does serve as an important safety valve on the top end of more traditional Commander. You're right about that.
Yeah, and I've as the guy who spends you don't even want to know how many hours a week I spend engaging with people who have a play group, they have an arms race, or somebody has a bigger collection, and or somebody doesn't like a certain strategy.
True. And I mean, our community answer really needs to stop being splinter the format.
Yeah,
everybody always gets behind that war banner, and it lasts a couple of days, sometimes into weeks, and then it dies down. But it's always just that's all you read about, and it's funny because you read about it on the EDH side of the subreddit, and you also read about it on the cEDH side. So it's like you can't get anywhere to get away from it.
Right.
I will say this though: we don't see it as often among the bigger names, and I'm not going to say we should necessarily be always deferential to the people who have more of a name and more of a cachet in the format, but oftentimes they do for a reason, and we see a lot of those types of people. People who have kind of driven cEDH content for a while be pretty universally opposed to that idea. Yeah. So I think that's always telling is, look at the people who've been doing this a while, listen to them. Because it's one of those things where experience matters.
Right. Yep. All right. Any other thoughts on this question, or shall we pick another one?
I mean, that's a really good question, but I think we should
that was a good one. I mean, that was
milked it.
I think we that was 30 minutes of us yakking about it. All right.
But I think it's an important question to be asked.
It's very important. It was just a lot. We had a lot on it. So you guys want to grab another one real quick and we'll move on?